Mark, what do you want out of this program?
To gain as much knowledge as I can about the real estate business, to network, just to learn.
What are you going to do with it? What's your ultimate goal?
I want to do affordable housing development and rehabs.
Okay. John, is that how you pronounce it?
It is.
What do you want?
To learn as much, he's kind of said what I wanted to say.
What do you want to do with it?
Learn about
What's your
capital
ultimate
markets,
career goal?
private equity, commercial real estate, all those lines.
Okay. What do you want?
Be manager.
Manage real estate,
Real estate.
commercial, multifamily, industrial, resort,
Commercial manager.
okay. Office, retail.
Office.
Okay. Matt, what do you want?
I want to build on my relationships, knowledge, and just kind of build myself towards success in the commercial real estate world.
And where do you want to take it, Matt?
I want to work in Orlando and hopefully work in developmental eventually.
Residential, office, retail, multifamily. Get out, there's too many already. Cody, what do you want?
Private equity.
Gonna go to New York? That's where all the money is.
I'd like to stay in the Southeast.
Okay. Brett, what do you want?
Ultimately, start a real estate firm,
That does.
brokerage.
Okay. One of the wonderful things about real estate is it's broad. I mean, tremendous variety. What do you want?
I want to get a career in real estate market research.
Oh. Market research is sort of like psychology. It's not quite a science yet. I wish I knew what made my customer buy. I wish they knew what made them buy. When you figure it out, you'll be rich. I hope you do. Thomas, what do you want?
Brokerage for mainly agricultural land,
Okay.
land and roads, ranches.
And Southeast is the right place for that. Peter, what do you want?
Long term, I want to do either multifamily development or maybe get into retail.
How many developers already? Get out of here. What do you want? You want to do what? Appraisal?
Yeah.
If you can determine value, value today, value tomorrow. I can remember in the depths of the recession, the Great Recession, which everybody's forgetting how horrible it was. Well, already we got blind memories. I remember I had two big developments that my bank were telling me basically I had no equity in. And 18 months later, I sell them for $30 million profit. I mean, tell me values really changed that much. Who knows? The world needs appraisers. What do you want?
I want to study and find what I really want to do.
I will tell you guys, I got 3 degrees from the University of Florida, and I worked between each degree, and that working helped me come back and fine-tune my education, because I knew each time, sort of like Kentucky windage, you got a little bit better idea what I want. What do you want?
I want to find out what I want.
The internal search. Okay, Carl. Let me know when you figure it out. I feel like I'm an entrepreneur. I feel like I'm standing up at an AA meeting saying, and to me, an entrepreneur doesn't mean you get, hey, Billy, that you necessarily start in a garage. It means you do more with less than others think humanly possible. Okay? And one of the stories I like to tell, the analogy is that America, from my perspective, was founded by entrepreneurs. Our founding fathers took on England, which was the ruling superpower of their era. Okay? I mean, really, England really ruled the waves. And that's not a joke. They did. The sun never set on the English Empire. And yet 13 little old colonies thought they could take on the British Empire, and they were quite frankly nuts. But they persevered, and they're persistent, and they wore them down. And they also chose their battlefield. They're at the end of a 3,000-mile supply line, and England had a few non-friends, basically known as France and Spain, and they worked the diplomatic angle, and they pulled it off. And ever since, I think that we've been a wonderful experience in entrepreneurship. I will tell you, by the way, I'm attention deficit disorder. My talks will jump all over the place. If I lose you, stick your hand up. If you know, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. This is officially a case study. The first half of my talk today will be introductory. The second half, I've brought a friend of mine and a mentoree from New York, Aaron, who will tell you his story. He is an entrepreneur, but he's an entrepreneur in a very different way than I am an entrepreneur. There's an old saying that if you can put enough gears on a riding lawnmower, you can pull a freight train. And I basically did my business pretty much without partners. I got my first partner back in 2005, 2006. That's just my personality. Aaron has both a personal partner that goes through deal after deal with them, and has chosen to bring in equity partners from the word go. Like I said, I didn't bring in equity partners in 2005, 2006. And quite frankly, I am most comfortable operating on my own. And that's just my personality and way of doing things. I did not start out to do this. I managed mom and pop residential rentals going through college, great flexible job. My father was a civil engineer, taught me how to fix things. I could change out a thermocouple and a gas heater and stop a toilet and a bunch of other minor maintenance stuff. And you can show apartments any time of day or night, or single family homes. I ended up buying my very first house with $1,000 down in 1972, which was a long, long time ago. My original goal was quite simple. I just wanted an outside income. I knew I was very headstrong. I knew, I tell people I do this because I can't hold a job. And there's a little bit of truth to that, a little bit of truth. Anyway, it kind of got out of hand, and eventually became a full-time job. And like I said, I started out with a house in 72, and I was buying basically all that stuff you hear on late night TV, how to buy real estate with nothing down. I was doing it all, knocking on doors, buying what they call FSBOs, for sale by owners, owner financing, that type of thing, and buying 3 or 4 a year. Took me 8 years, from 1972 to 1980, to get to 24 houses. And and actually, quite frankly, I retired briefly then for about 3 months because I had a nice middle-class income, I could afford my mortgage payment, had the car paid off. And after 3 months, I got bored and said, okay, I'll just take this and see where it goes. But I quickly realized that single-family homes just don't roll out. I mean, there's no economies of scale, everyone's unique, everyone has shown, et cetera, and I got into multifamily. And fortunately for me, there is a neighborhood north of the University of Florida called College Park. And I mean, the industry has changed incredibly in the last 10, 15, 20 years. But back in the 80s, standard apartment community was 64 to 80 units. Small. Now they're 2, 3, you don't build something unless it's 300 units. But back then they built them much smaller. And the area north of the University of Florida had a lot of 12 units. I think the biggest thing in the whole place was 40 units. The next biggest was 32 units. And then the third biggest was 24, and everything else was 12 to 16. And these were all in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. Student housing was just a local business. Local people bought, built small stuff like that. Now, it's a huge asset class of its own. There are 3 big REITs in the space, and I am 4th largest behind the REIT. I'm the largest private owner of real estate, and probably the largest individual who personally owns the most. I probably personally own more student housing real estate than anything in America. That's a more statement of the fragment of the industry than the size of my business. But anyway, I started buying up in College Park, 4 units, 12 units, 16 units. And over time, I got, right now I got 450 units in College Park. But I got to do something. Not your standard apartment community is 15 million, 20, 25, 30, 50 million dollars. They're expensive, okay? And unless your last name is Rockefeller or you're real good at picking lottery numbers, private individuals don't buy apartment communities. It's an institutional game. But I got lucky. I got to buy one on the installment plan. And that gave me the financial resources. I did a lot of renovation, a lot of value add, et cetera, spent every dime I had rolling it back in the business. And then I got big enough to go out and start buying individual apartment communities. You all have a sheet there. And this is the organization chart of the Collier Companies. And I meet somebody and they give me a title, they're a VP. I have no idea what that means. I wish people would hand me organization charts of their business. But this is us. And somewhere north of 450 people. Every one of these is an apartment community in alphabetical order. Arbor Park, Arlington Square, thank you. Aspen Ridge, Barrington, Bivens Cove, all the way down to West 10, which is up in Tallahassee. We have 9 communities in Tallahassee. We are the largest provider of student housing in Gainesville. We are definitely the largest in Tallahassee. We have 3 communities in Tampa and getting ready to build a 4th, which is going to be the subject of one of our case studies. So, I mean, simply because nobody really tends to concentrate the way do we, if we're not the largest provider in the University of South Florida, we're close to it. Oh, by the way, I'd like to introduce Angela Tharp, who graduated from this program back in 2005. She is she's my boss. She runs my schedule, takes care of me. I keep her busy if she needs her own assistant. Anyway, she's also the one you email your assignments to, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of what I am going to try to talk to you about is, there's IQ, intelligence quotient, which you're born with, okay? And there's something called EQ, which is a concept that's come out in the last decade or two, which is your emotional intelligence. And your emotional intelligence is composed of 2 things: your ability to manage your moods. Seth, can you control your moods? Can you direct your emotions?
Try.
You're lost. You gotta be able to manage your moods and direct your emotions, okay? Emotional self-control, emotional awareness, emotional self-regulation. What did Yoda say? There's no try, there's only do or not do. And that's one half of it. And the other is your ability to sense others' emotions, okay? Can you see how you impact other people? Can you see how they react to you? Can you influence and persuade, et cetera? This is emotional intelligence. And folks, you are going to meet a lot of great professors, and they're going to teach you a lot of hard skills. I'm going to teach you some hard skills too, but I'm going to focus on soft skills. Because folks, in the competitive environment you're going to be in, hard skills are the table stakes. Everybody knows what a cap rate is, okay? Everybody can calculate internal rate of return, all right? Table stakes. You've got to be good with people, okay? Now, being good with people alone is not enough. You need both together, okay? But the beautiful thing is, your IQ in large measure was fixed at birth. Yes, your nutrition in the first few years can impact it, et cetera. How many words your parents speak to you will impact it a bit. But by large measure, at birth and within the first 5 years, it is what it is. Your EQ. That is yours to develop. Okay? That is yours to develop. And I will tell you, I created an organization. I created an organization on purpose. And I did it and I have half a dozen friends who have done very well in real estate locally. And yet I will tell you, without arrogance, I've been able financially to greatly surpass them. And it's not because of the damn thing I've done, it's because of what my organization has done for me, okay? And also I've reached out of Gainesville in the new way that others have not been willing to do. But I will tell you, it is the challenge of leading an organization that has forced me to grow. And I will tell you, you see Angela there? Angela is a volunteer. Angela could get a better job anywhere in America tomorrow. She's that good. Everybody that works for me is that good. I swear to you, every one of them could get another job tomorrow. They're good. I wouldn't want somebody working for me who couldn't get another job tomorrow. I have good people working for me. I have great people working for me. and they become greater as a team. But every organization is the shadow of a leader. I cannot have great people working for me if I don't respect, don't give them the space and the latitude to work. I will tell you, somewhere in your packet there's something I call the manifesto, which I'll get around to one of these days, possibly. And in there it says we believe what we believe in. One of the things in there is the social compact, which came out of the age of enlightenment. Okay? And it's tied into a concept specifically here of something called stewardship leadership. I believe that I am responsible as an owner and a leader to many, many stakeholders. Now, my number one is my owner, which is me and my partners. Okay? But my next greatest stakeholder is my customer, and my next greater after that is my team members, and I'm even putting them in sort of a false hierarchy. Because it's like in a marriage, who's winning, you or your wife? Well, that's a false hierarchy. It really is. All my stakeholders have to be winning in proportion to their stake. But one of my big stakeholders is my community. I am not in an island, okay? And quite frankly, if America's not prospering, nobody has money to pay me rent, okay? I need everybody to prosper. And I am a great believer in what I call principal profit and what I call Main Street values. And the thing that I'm really kind of annoyed with is Wall Street, which I think has dragged the good name of capitalism and free markets through the dirt with extravagant greed. Ronald Reagan once talked about America being a city on a hill, a city of light, a role model for the world. And I want capitalism to be that, because it's a great way to harness America, to harness human emotions and focus them and create prosperity. But if you get into this beggar thy neighbor, and I mean the worst things, quite frankly, that the business schools of America the last 30 years taught business MBAs was your only responsibility is shareholder value. You can to everything else, and that's wrong. I cannot quantify your ethical and moral duty to others, but it exists and you cannot ignore it, okay? And we're in this, well, we had the Great Recession because a bunch of jerks up in Wall Street created a bunch of toxic things that blew up. And everybody knew they're going to blow up. You got to read but the responsibility was so diffuse, you really couldn't claim it was a bad culture. There's a saying that no raindrop takes responsibility, but still the flood happens. Well, that was Wall Street and those toxic instruments and blew it. And I think a lot of people went through a lot of unnecessary pain. But anyway, that's a little bit of philosophy of what I consider principal profit, stewardship leadership, and the social contract. And I think that philosophy has allowed me to attract a much higher quality of people than I other could. And by the way, in this business, everybody wants to be the alpha dog. Everybody wants to be in the top 5%. Well, I want to be in the top 5% too. But I got a slightly different definition than Wall Street. Wall Street wants to be in the top 5% in the quarter, every 90 days. I want to be in the top 25% year after year for 25 years. I don't need to be in the top 5% every year. If I'm in the top 25% of the outcomes every year for a quarter of a century, I will be in the top 5% looking back. I assure you, probably the top 1%. So when you try to go be in the top 5% every year, you take too many risks. I have a great CEO named Andy Hogshead, who's been with me over 10 years, just over 10 years. He was my banker with Wachovia, now Wells Fargo, for 7 years prior to that. And he said, Nathan, your problem is you want an 80% probability of success. You're competing with people who are happy with 50-50. And it's true, because the memories of Wall Street are so short. I compete with people that are paid to plant. They don't have to hang around to harvest. They get the money out the door, they get your bonus. If it blows up 3 years later, did you see any bonuses clawed back after the Great Recession, much as after a bad normal investment? No. But I have to compete with people whose incentives are incredibly short-term, and it's scary, okay? But, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, and hopefully I'm fast. Anyway, there's somewhere around, 42, 45 communities here, and in the community manager, service manager and the people underneath them, but that's who we are. And it's a great bunch of people, and I'm very proud to have them with us. Oh yeah, as Professor, as Wayne mentioned, we're fourth behind ACC, Campus Crest, and EDR. Campus Crest, if you notice, there's somebody building a development out behind the Hilton, and if it's going to be done in time for school, I will be very, very surprised. I wish all my competitors well, but they're going to have a problem. And there we are, Collier Companies, and as you can see, I mean, there's a big gap. We're at 22,000 beds. Next gap is the third smaller, 14,000 beds. Back in 2012, we were the 163rd largest company, which really doesn't sound like much. Florida's third largest state. We passed New York last year. California and Texas are ahead of us, and we're a long way behind them. But it's nice to be the third largest state in America. And this is me. Dr. Archer mentioned it most. One of the things there's a couple reasons I'm successful. That's one of them. That's my office at home, okay? I love to read. Why? Because I'm lazy. I want to make new mistakes, not old mistakes, okay? I love to read. I figure a good book, somebody took everything they learned in a lifetime, condensed it, and they gave it to me. So I can live 1,000 lives, have the intelligence of 1,000 people, and you stop learning, you start dying, okay? And I will tell you, let's see, here's the other reason why I am where I'm at, or one other reason. Oops, wait, aha. That's a house in Carroll City, 171st Street. Jealousy windows. There's a window unit air conditioner. When I lived there back in the 60s, there was no AC. Until I was 12 years old, my parents got divorced back in the 60s. Everybody does that in a day. Back then it was unusual. My mother was a little bit dysfunctional, and she couldn't manage money, and that's where we lived. Very fortunately for me, about the age of 7th grade, I got kicked over to my father, who was the president of the University of Florida, and so I was very, very lucky. I had the worst role model to push me away from, I don't want to be this, okay? And then I had the world's best role model, my father, who believed in me and trusted me and encouraged me, etc. And so, but I didn't want to live like that, okay? I really didn't. So that was a moving away value. And I don't think I would have gotten where I was if I didn't have that, that old, if you've ever read, Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara reaches down and grabs the dirt of the family plantation terror, and by God as my witness, I'll never be poor again. Well, that was mine. But, the trouble with moving away values is the further away you get from them, the less motivational they are, all right, But so you need something else, and that's called a moving toward value. And to me, business turned out to be the funnest game in the world. Incredibly complex, always changing, outdoors, I like that, really appealed to my attention deficit disorder. Oh, and I created an organization because I don't follow through. Okay, I don't follow through. Okay, I have Angela because I don't follow through. Okay, and she is wonderful, okay? She's fantastic, I'm lucky. She's left me once, but she came back. The big city of Chicago called, but she came back. Anyway, and we always take our prodigal children back. Welcome into the family. But my organization follows up, and so I'm very fortunate to have that organization to follow up behind me. But it illustrates another thing, which is, folks, don't worry about your weaknesses. Just be aware of them and backstop them, and then work on your strengths. I mean, don't try to, don't try to make the squirrel swim. Squirrels climb trees, okay? Don't try to make the eagle a fast runner. Eagles don't run, they fly. So know your weaknesses, backstop it, and then just focus on your strengths. Anyway, here's yet another reason. These is a stack, can't really tell, it's about 20 inches high, about one a year, more than one. Well, anyway, that's my journals. Folks, I teach something in-house every fall called Collier College, about 10 sessions on graduation. And the very first session is sort of an extended version of me asking, what do you want? Okay, what do you want out of life? And I take them through the 6 roles in life, you know, personal, family, educational, career, spiritual. And I say, you know, tell me your values, decide your values. I give them out a pack of cards, values, and say, put them in order, what's most important to you? And then I say, folks, go through, and it's a value setting, goal setting class. Spend 2 or 3 hours at this. Set out your, you know, put goals. I want 3 to 5 goals in each of the 6 roles of your life, okay? And then illustratively in the class, you say, okay, pick one goal and come up with an action plan, come up with timelines, quantify how will you know you've got there, what will you feel, what will be different about your life, what will be different about you when you've gotten there, okay? And you know, a written goal, so few people have them, okay? Folks, you know, you can talk about self-discipline, and there's a role for self-discipline in your life. You can think of discipline, self-discipline, as like the forms on concrete. You need them to cement. But, you know, if day after day you need self-discipline to get you doing the basics of your life, you have to ask yourself, are you really doing what you want to do? Because I will tell you, a given amount of desire power outweighs the same amount of willpower. You want power, not willpower, okay? Focus yourself on what you want. Now, every job has parts that you don't like, and that's life, okay? But the want power to your goal should just pull you through that. You don't want to be driving yourself with a whip, with self-discipline. I mean, that's great for little spurts, et cetera, but you want your life driven by want power, by desire power, by your goals pulling you forward in life. Well, fortunately for me, business became a lot of fun, you know, and I really enjoyed it, and the complexity of leading people. Oh, I don't, it's not in the handout, but but I can get Angela to send this to you. Oh yeah, these are, there's another slide behind. These are, I think, 15 of my books, and most of them are about human psychology, okay? Because that's what, I mean, you can't do much by yourself. You really can't, right? You need help. You need others to want to help you. They say leadership is a process of making people want to do what you need them to do. You know, and you're being asked to read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I was handed that book in 1989, right after it came out. And somebody said, you know, I know you love to read. You might like this book, seems to be. And I read it. And folks, it's summarized and brought together more of the principles I had read about than any other book I have read, okay? Sometimes, occasionally, someone comes to me and says, Nate, this is just common sense. And I said, right, but it's not common practice. Are you doing it? And he was like, no. Okay, then it's a format to help you read, to help you get organized. In my company, whenever we hire anybody that's full-time, if you're part-time, we give you a little pamphlet on it. But if it's full-time, we give you the book and we say, this is what our culture is about. If you're not comfortable with this, you won't be comfortable here. And we ask them to write a 2-page reaction paper. Not a summary, but a reaction paper. Give them a $50 reading bonus if they do it. And it's completely voluntary. You just never get promoted or never get a raise until you do. And your compliance rate is pretty high. And we're asking you to write a short reaction paper to each chapter. I want to make sure, not a summary, I know what it says. I want your thoughts on it, how it might apply to your life, et cetera, et cetera. And it's my attempt to help you get some EQ, some soft skills. Now, this is not a business book. It is a life management book. It is an EQ book. It has 24/7 application. I tell my people, I can attempt to control what you do from 8 o'clock to 6 p.m. I can't tell you what to do when you go home. But I will tell you the principles on this book will help your personal life as much as it'll help your personal life. You know, Stephen Covey is great on principles. Anthony Robbins is really great on application. Covey tells you what to do and why to do it. Anthony Robbins tells you how to do it. He's good on the technology of change, okay? And his books are rich with the technology of how to do this stuff. You have to pick where you want to go, and he'll help you go there, okay? And Scott Peck, I mean, this book spent 15 years on New York Times nonfiction bestseller list. I find it a fascinating tool, and he talks about his 4 tools of self-discipline, and I think they're incredibly powerful. First half of the book is very different from the second half of the book, by the way. Second half of the book is by something called grace. And the first time I read it, I was a lot younger, and I just couldn't get into the second half of the book. 10 years later, I picked it up, and I loved the second half. Book hadn't changed, I changed. There's a saying. Candace, how long does it take people to change? They don't unless they want to. There's a saying that it takes but an instant to walk through the gate of change. It takes as long as you want to get ready. All right? You can change whenever you want to. You just got to want to and got to walk through that gate. All right? Getting to yes, best book, only like 176 pages. Best book on negotiation I've ever read. Best book on negotiation. Primarily principles, very few, if any, tactics. He was passed on. He was up to Harvard. He was up at Harvard Law School. And I went up there and took a week-long course about 10, 15 years ago, back when he was still there. I remember being up at Harvard, taking executive ed at the business school, crossing the Charles River, and just going over to law school because, I became a lawyer, and so it's kind of go visit Harvard Law School, and happened to just luckily walk into a lecture he was giving and finding out that he gave this week-long class and really enjoyed it. But best book on negotiation. Viktor Frankl. What's the meaning of life?
The meaning of life? I have absolutely no idea.
Well, he's right, because the meaning of life is whatever you give it, nothing more. Viktor Frankl said the meaning of life is a question life asks of us, not a question we get to ask of life. If you give it no meaning, it will have no meaning. It gives it whatever meaning you choose to give. So good luck picking a good one. But really, seriously. Anyway, Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist, who unfortunately but fortunately survived Hitler's death camps. And he wrote a book about the experience. And it's a very powerful book. If you're ever feeling sorry for yourself, go read it, okay? But he basically said, freedom, I may not have freedom to move about, but I still have the liberty to pick my mental state. Okay? And if he can make that decision under those circumstances, we ain't got any excuses. Okay? Life turns out best for those who make the best of how life turns out. But anyway, incredibly powerful book. Love is Letting Go of Fear, Real Magic. The old classic. I mean, this was built back in the 20s, okay? By the way, Wayne Dyer, he's written dozens of books, but he defines magic, going back to Candace, magic, according to Wayne Dyer, is when you get yourself to do something you used to think you couldn't. And I assure you, Candace, you can create real magic in your life, okay? There are things you think are impossible that you can change your mind about for you to do. Okay? And that holds true for every one of you has the ability to create real magic in your life. And somewhere I have, you come to my office, there's a 6-8-foot statue of a guy carving himself out of a block of stone. Okay, and it's called Self-Made Man. And folks, I will tell you, I'm not the guy I was 10 years ago, and that guy wasn't the guy he was 10 years ago, and that guy isn't the guy he was 10 years ago. I had to turn myself into a leader. I was not born a leader. I was not born interested in being a steward. I was not born interested in the social compact. I realized to create an organization that was effective, I had to become worthy of the quality of people I wanted to follow. Okay? So you can and should consider yourself a work of art in creation. How to Win Friends and Influence People, classic. And I will tell you, I mean, me back there. I can remember I was 22 or something, and living with a wonderful young lady eventually became my life. This was back, okay guys, anybody know what an IBM Selectric is? Old electric typewriter, okay? This was back before the very first computer was born. Longhand was all you had. I wrote out, I remember my girlfriend coming in one morning, Saturday morning, and I was literally writing out an outline of how to win friends and influence people because I wanted to remember it. And just reading it didn't make me remember it. Because the challenge is, because if you know and you don't do, you don't know. Okay? Which is one reason why I love quotes. Because I think of a quote as like a tab on a body of knowledge. I say the quote to myself, and I'm pulling up a body of knowledge that goes with it. And so I literally wrote it out, and then once I got my computer, I mean, I've written out synopses of 7 Habits, Road Less Traveled, Getting to Yes, because I needed to drive these things deep into my life. Many things shape us, and our interpretation of us shape us. And I remember, I don't even remember how old I was, one time being at summer camp. And there was somebody there that was always prepared and always nicely dressed. And I wondered how they pulled it off. And so, I did Sherlock Holmes, and I followed them around. And I noticed that they would disappear for half an hour, 45 minutes, and they would go back, and I would see them reading or changing their clothes. So I said, it's what you do when others aren't looking that makes you shine when they are looking. And I remember I was probably, 10, 12 years old, and that stuck with me for the rest of my life. What you do when others aren't looking is what makes you shine, or not shine if you stay on your damn couch and watch your TV, makes you shine when others are looking, okay? It's the stuff beneath the waves that makes the iceberg. Learned Optimism, it's a great book. You can think of it as like this was published even before. This guy actually was one of the people who helped popularize EQ, emotional intelligence. And he basically, optimists succeed more than pessimists, in part because they try more, and in part because they're able to persuade others to help them, and also because they try more often. But basically, and by the way, just scientific analysis know that pessimists and optimists are about right and wrong equally. Just the optimists succeed more because they try more. If you don't try, you're going to fail. Right? You fail 100% of the things you don't try. Anyway, so Martin writes about how to learn to be an optimist. David and Goliath is the most recent of these books. Oh yeah, Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence. It's a great book on how why Goliath doesn't always win. And to be a spoiler, the number one thing is David can never win on Goliath's playing field. David has to find a way to fight on his playing field. And, specifically, did David go up there and get inside of Goliath's sword? No. He stood, quite a few paces back and went, Pow! All right? If he'd gotten up inside of, within Goliath's reach, goner, okay? So you got to pick your playing field, your own playing field. Oh, you just don't understand by Deborah Tannen. Oh, I have a whole lecture I give on communication at Collier College. And one of my favorite quotes on communication is the biggest problem with communication is the illusion it just occurred, okay? We think we've communicated and we haven't. Me and my CEO have a real good relationship, but I can remember recently we had an email, well, obviously you meant that was going to happen. I said, no, I had no idea that this decision implied that action. You didn't tell me you're going to, anyway. So we had not communicated, even though we worked side by side for a decade. And in Deborah Tannen starts out with the analogy, and I'm going to use a couple stereotypes here, so forgive me, but Deborah was raised by a New England family that were, in every sense of the stereotypical, and in New England, you are very reserved, you are very formal, you treat people with respect, et cetera, et cetera. And if somebody loses their temper, the only really polite thing is to withdraw until they calm down. Okay? She married a classic Italian. And once again, your classic Italian, sit around the dinner table and they yell at each other. And they love each other. It means nothing. Okay? And to withdraw, to leave the table is the ultimate insult. Now, do you think our classic cold, for lack of a better word, New England patriarch and this hot-blooded Italian married and communicated well? No. They didn't intend to send the messages that, the meaning of any message is the response you receive, okay? In other words, how they respond tells you what they heard. It may not have been what you intended, believe me. But anyway, so he would get all excited and yell and scream, and he was just yelling and screaming. It didn't mean anything. It was like being in a football game. So what? And she would think, oh, he's lost it. I am going to go and retire to the bedroom until... Anyway, so they got divorced. But the good thing that came out of this is she wrote a book on communication styles. And the title, and she also wrote Communicating 9 to 5, more specifically to business. But it starts out with the fact that people have different communication styles, and you better understand them, okay? You better understand them. Great book. The fifth discipline. Systems. Systems are how people are organized, and it's complex. Often in a complex system, the outcome of your actions will not play out next to you and immediately. It will play out 3 silos over and 6 months later. And I'm going to give you an example of, I think a bad system or a bad outcome. A friend of mine, and this was like 2 recessions ago, who was a good builder and had a solid net worth, had a development that was still in its construction financing being rolled over, and he went to his banker when it came up and said, I'd like to roll it over for another year. And this guy was a good, solid customer. His banker said, I'm very sorry, I can't. And my friend looked at him and said, okay, and went down to the next bank and got his loan. And bankers kind of move around like a carousel, and 5 or 6 later, this guy was at another bank. And my friend happened to bump into him and said, why didn't you roll? I had no problem with the next bank getting that thing. Why didn't you roll my loan over? And the banker said, well, here's the story. We're in a recession, real estate driven. We had, 7% exposure to real estate. I'm picking numbers out of the air. The industry average was 5. Board of directors up in New York City said, get us down to 5% exposure on real estate. Well, I knew I had loans that if I called, nobody would take them, okay? And they would default, and I would look bad, and the bank would look bad. The only loans I could call were the good ones. So think about it. That board of directors up there was so clueless about what would really, they didn't understand the systems and processes underneath them. They chased away their best customers because those loan officers did what was logical and reasonable from their perspective. The only loans they called were the good ones because they're the only ones that wouldn't go in default, okay? Not saying that the marginal loans were necessarily bad, because believe me, I told you about my bank telling me my loan had no equity in 18 months. I mean, if they called that loan then, I would have been in trouble. They did, thank God, which is why I still do business with them. But it's an example of systems and processes, and if you're ever a leader, if you're ever up there, you better understand what happens when you say something, and the only way you can do that is by getting your butt out on the factory floor and talking to people, okay? But you've got to understand the systems. Anyway, that's, the second half of that book gets awful dense, but the first half is really good. And even if you just understand that there are systems and processes out there that you need to be aware of, that would be very powerful. Jack Welch, I love Jack. His 2 books are good. And Harold Guillen, boy, we take the concept of conglomerate for granted, and now that globalization's come and completely changed the world, we'll see. There's a school of thought that globalization is going to permanently drive down the return on capital, simply because capital can flow around so much more freely than it did before. Used to be, prior to the Great Recession, people say, hey, put your money in retirement, you'll make 8 to 12% in the stock market, et cetera, et cetera. There are those who are saying that the future 25 years of the stock market is going to be a lot closer to 6 to 8. If that's true, a lot of pension plans are in trouble. We'll see. But anyway, the point being that Harold Guillen ran an outfit called IT&T back in the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s, and it was the first conglomerate. And by that I mean it was the first world-spanning corporation. It was huge, and he built it up. And quite frankly, and he was a good manager. But this was back in the day of you spent 30 years at one corporation, you wore a suit, it was pretty much a white male world. Things have changed tremendously since then. But quite frankly, and he had a high earnings per share multiplier. And oh, by the way, he managed earnings. Jack Welch managed earnings too. Everybody manages earnings, but he was a master of it. And he built a good corporation. They dismantled it after he retired because, quite frankly, nobody else was the workaholic or the brain to manage it. They cut it in half, two halves. But he built it by really the simplest thing. It's like he was a growth company. So he had Apple or whatever, one of these earnings per share that was 50% higher than the market. So he'd go up and buy all these little companies, and he'd buy up a company with $100 million of earnings at a 12 multiplier, and the minute he rolled it into IT&T, it got an 18 multiplier. So he kept doing this, and of course, obviously, everybody thought he was a genius, and he was good, but a lot of the growth was simple smoke and mirrors of taking earnings at 12 and labeling them IT&T and having them become 18. So, but you have to create the mystique to begin with. If you don't create the mystique, it can't happen. And in one sense of the words, he was sort of like an unglamorous Steve Jobs of his day. But anyway, it's a great book on the basics of managing, and I tremendously enjoyed it. Oh, by the way, this is a little bit of a preview of an upcoming case study. And this is 13th Street, okay? 21 blocks of where we are now. I go down 21 blocks, we're right there, sitting here right now. This is 260 existing units. This is it over here, called Hidden Lake. Dr. Archer mentioned my textbook, Construction Funding. It basically tells the story of a development, and the development is Hidden Lake. And when I was reading books, I ran across two kinds of books. And in one book, I couldn't really understand, because the authors telling their story seemed to go from triumph to triumph, from mountaintop to mountaintop, with no valleys, no doubts. Everything was always wonderful. And I kept thinking, when am I going to find this world? Because that's not the world I'm living in. And I finally realized, and here's my analogy, I call it the restaurant analogy. You go in, and there is the dining room, and there's soft music, and there's white candles, and white tablecloths, and everything is wonderful. And you go through the double doors into the kitchen, and it's lousy and noisy, and there may be an organization behind it, but it sounds chaotic. I was living in the kitchen, and for whatever reason, the only thing this author wanted to show me was the dining room. And folks, I didn't learn much from the dining room. And I think because people want to burnish a reputation for the next job, or just burnish a reputation in general, or they want to be hired as a consultant, they didn't want to tell you about the fears and doubts, etc. Okay? And folks, if you push the edge, you get out of your comfort zone. If you don't do that, you don't grow. And somewhere in your packet, there is this. Angela, can you get me one side working on this and leave that there if you can and focus on there? And about, and this is every deal I've ever done, okay? Starting out with, way down in the bottom, December 27th, 1972, first house. And then you'll see it took 7 years to get to 25 houses. About midway up there, right there, you'll see the Shea portfolio, 1,400 units. Folks, that was about $100 million worth of real estate, okay? Connor, how much should I put down on $100 million worth of real estate? Well, normally you'd put down at least 20%.
10, 20%.
Yeah, 20 million bucks. Connor, I didn't have 20 million bucks, okay? But Steve, and I'd known Steve, we were what I would call business friends. We were friends, but we didn't go on vacation, but we were friends. We knew each other, small town. And Steve had about 5, 7 communities he wanted to sell. And Steve wanted top dollar for them. But Steve didn't want to pay a broker or all that other stuff. So Steve made me a deal. Buy $100 million of my real estate. And only $1 million down. That's called 99% leverage cover. Okay? Now, in retrospect, it was one of the best deals of my life. In part because interest rates dropped like a rock and I was able to finance out. Couldn't predict that. But Steve gave me 10 years to pay him off, okay? And I paid him off about year 5. But that was mainly because of interest rates. But I will tell you, in retrospect, it looks like a sure thing, okay? But I will tell you, that deal was so thin and so scary. I couldn't, I called up Steve the night before. We're supposed to close the next morning. And I said, Steve, and I had a $50,000 deposit down. I said, Steve, keep my money if you have to. I can't do the deal. It's just too thin. It's too scary. Okay? And I'm the entrepreneur. And Steve said, yeah, come on down and talk to me in the morning. And basically, the deal not only had $1 million down, I was supposed to give him $1 million a year for the next 3 to 4 years. And he said, I'll tell you what, I will, and Steve had this set up in trust for his kids, etc. I will personally lend you $1 million each year for the next 2 years if you need it. And with that as sort of I wasn't sure I could get together another $1 million in the next year, okay? And I was signing personally on this, personal liability. And so with that as my, shall we say, safety rail, my second parachute, I went ahead and did the deal. But I can take you through deal after deal there, and you know, well, we got 3-2 votes from the Planning Commission or 3-2 votes from the City Commission, or they were always cliffhangers, okay? And in retrospect, because it happened, we assume it had to happen. No. It's not that way at all. It happens because you keep pushing. Anyway, we are going to talk about Hidden Lake, and it's 260 existing units. That is the quote-unquote lake that the Hidden refers to. It's not actually a lake, it's a wetland. The neighbors hated me. They sued me, tried to stop it. And I will tell more details about the story. But the real reason we are looking at this one is I've always wanted to get access to 13th Street. And Brazen and Cadillac went out of business 2 or 3 years ago in the middle of the recession. And so I was able to buy a parcel of land to connect up. And so in this little L, I'm going to build 40 units, taking Hidden Lake to 300 units, but more important than that, getting access, okay? And the best advertisement for an apartment community is not a sign, it's an apartment building. Everybody knows what an apartment building looks like. You drive by on 13th Street, you see apartment building, you see an entryway, you know, there's apartments there. And I don't have to drag people back with marketing and advertising back down 21st Avenue to see it. But anyway, there's a lot of detail it goes into that, and boy, I mean, I could tell you about, and I will tell you when we do the case study, about the regulatory and permitting struggle, shall we say. It took to get through that, and we are hopefully should be start pushing dirt any week now, and we're hoping to be ready in time for the 2015 school year there. I mean, in the heyday, 90s, used to be you could develop and you'd make enough profit to finance out, and then the REITs were invented by Congress. Connor, what's a REIT? And what makes it unique? And what's the benefit? Okay. In America and in many developed countries, there's something known as the double taxation of dividends. Corporations are taxed at the corporate level, and when they distribute their earnings to their shareholders as dividends, they're taxed again. That's the double taxation of dividends, okay? You could argue it's stupid and wrong, but it's common, okay? And we have double taxation of dividends. REIT stands for Real Estate Investment Trusts. And back in the early 80s, Congress decided that, the average man needed to be able to invest in real estate. Shouldn't be only for the rich to invest in real estate. Remember I talked to you about only institutions can buy apartment communities? Well, you think apartment communities, try buying a mall. A mall is $1 billion to start. $1 billion, There's some you can get for $500 million, but malls are expensive. Anyway, so Congress decided the average man should be able to invest in real estate, so they created the REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, and really it is it's a federal creation. Okay, you're incorporated by states. The Fed does not create corporations. States create corporations, and you choose the state you'll be incorporated in, and we'll talk about Delaware, which is where half of America's Fortune 500 choose to be incorporated, and that's because Delaware will do anything to make a corporation happy, and they live on the fees, because what else anybody in Delaware? But anyway, Congress passed a law that basically said if you pay out 90% of your income to your shareholders, you're not taxed at the corporate level. They got rid of one layer of taxation. Well, REITs took off, okay? And you don't have to be publicly traded, you just have to comply with the tax. And they did this in the early 80s, and it took a while, but by the late 80s, REITs were everywhere. And from my perspective, it's lousy because you have this whole slice of corporate America who now does nothing but develop. Well, they own, but they also do a lot of development. Okay, they tend to be low leveraged, no more than 50% leveraged. When I go out, oh, by the way, most of my stuff is on 10-year fixed money. Okay, we borrow from Freddie, we borrow from Fannie, we buy from life companies, we borrow from pension funds, but we generally borrow on a 10-year term fixed. Okay, and during the heyday, it got down to 100 basis points. Oh, by the way, a basis point is 1% of a percent. In other words, 100 basis point equals 1 percentage point. But when you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, a basis point makes a big deal. So our industry talks in terms of basis points. Anyway, we're borrowing at 95 basis points over the 10-year Treasury. And by the way, guys, I have lived in times when the Treasury has been 18%. Okay? In the last 30 years, the Treasury has been as high as 18%. Okay? And so this 1.6, where it got down to, is like, I mean, when I got my MBA, they taught me that the 10-year Treasury, because in theory it's risk-free, there's a pure cost of money that was 2 or 3%, and then there's inflation. So the 10-year Treasury should be the pure cost of money plus inflation. Yes?
So if the rate goes down to 1.6, why don't you do something longer than 10 years? You can lock in the
Because these loans have something called defeasance, which is really just a fancy word for prepayment penalty. Okay? They are basically, if you want to pay the loan, you have to replace the value of your property with Treasury bills, okay, of equal value. Okay? Not with AAA, IBM, GE corporates, which would be a lot cheaper. You've got to go in there and replace them with U.S. bonds. And that's very expensive, and basically you just don't do it. It's very expensive to do. So you try to pick your holding period, and I am right now 65% what I call core. 65% of those properties up there I own personally with no partners whatsoever. Another third I have institutional partners in, typically 10%, though as high as 28 and as low as 5. I have institutional partners, and I mean we have some great partners. Let's see, get go back. Oh yeah, we have the Sterling, which is they own the Mets. Outfit known Madison Realty, a big holder of retail, and we are one of their sticking their finger in student housing. The state of Utah is one of our partners. Okay, we bought 2 properties with them, and we're getting ready to finance it. And say, how would you like to finance it? I said, we don't. I said, what do you mean you don't? We want to pay cash. I said, you can get treasuries for 3%. They say, well, but I mean, we get a loan for 4%. We said, well, we're buying treasuries at 2.5. Why should we borrow money at 4? I said, okay. And so they paid cash. All right. And but the state of Utah, listen, they said every day the public employees of Utah plump $100 million on our desk and say, invest it. And we have a problem getting it out the door. So they paid cash. Anyway, great partners. SEB, it's a German investment bank. Scandinavian with the German subholding. JP Morgan, a great partner. GMAC, they'd gone bankrupt, but their silo was good and they spun off. That was our very first partner. But some of my partner holdings are 7 years, because their holding period is more like 7 years. And the money is a little bit cheaper. But right now, well, first off, we have 45 communities, so I got 4 to 5 loans coming up every year. And at some point in time, Billy, that's what Billy does, okay? Billy, it's easy to do. It just takes you 5 or 10 minutes to refi a property, right? For two minutes, talk about what it takes to refi a property.
It takes us about 90 days from when we put a package out to lenders, and that's my boss and I full-time. We have to coordinate with the site and do 5 or 6 inspections. It's a full-time job for 3 months.
And do lenders like us? Why do they love us? We send out good First off, you may have noticed I was a CPA for a while. Our entire accounting department is in-house, including tax preparation and filing, and we have good financial statements. You'd be amazed how many people, because I've tried to learn 360 about everything that impacts what I do. You'd be amazed how many people are good at business and lousy, but they couldn't tell you where they're making money. They barely know they don't understand accounting. It's the language of business. I got my bachelor's in finance, and I worked up in Atlanta, New York for a year, and then realized I wasn't cut out for Fortune 500 America. Came back like many people, got my MBA. But as a finance major, I couldn't tell where the accountants were burying the bodies. Okay? I didn't know the language. I knew, anyway, and this was before the Fisher School of Accounting. This was back in 1978 or something. But I took every accounting course, literally, that the School of Business here offered because I wanted to understand the language of business. I wanted to know, and I can tell you some horror stories about where they hide the money. You can do a lot with allowances and reserves. And then also, folks, I'm not going to have much of a chance to touch on it, but folks, it doesn't matter how much money or prosperity or money you make if you can't keep it. Okay? And there's that guy up there in Washington, D.C. called the government. And they want to take your money. They want 39.6% of it. Okay? And what matters is what you can keep in your pocket. Okay? So you better learn taxes. Right? I took a great tax course from a professor, Jesse Boyles. I think he's going to retire soon if he hasn't already. But he taught us from the code. Okay? And you got to take the code and anything you could write in it into your exam. That didn't really help, because if you didn't know where what answer was, if you didn't know what to look for, it might give you the last minute of assurance as you dug for the answer. And then somebody made a mistake. Oh, by the way, are there any joint MBA JDs here? Good, because I hate that. You cannot master business in 2 years, and you can't master law in 3, and it's a joke to say that you can master them combined in 4. Okay? You can be an MBA with a law minor, and you can be a lawyer with a business minor, but you are not a JD MBA. You don't have both degrees. Anyway, they hadn't created that abomination when I was here. I got my bachelor's in 74, my master's in 78, and my JD in 78 and 82. But anyway, in theory, oh, by the way, back then, they didn't care how many classes you took. They charged you the same thing. You could take 1 million credit hours, they didn't care. Right? They really didn't care. They didn't manage your credit hours. And in theory, then and now, there's reciprocity between the graduate schools. In theory, you can go register for, if you have the prerequisites, for any course you want. Okay, any graduate school at the University of Florida. And so I wandered over the law school, and nobody had invented the JD MBA yet. And I said, hey, I'm from the graduate school getting my MBA, and I want to take a tax course. And they looked at me like I was crazy, because I was, but they said, well, get the professor to sign this thing. And by then I was a CPA, and he walks in, and I said, hi, I'm Nathan, I want to take your tax course. I took Jesse Boyle's, and I said, I'm a CPA, and he said, okay, good luck. Well, I made a C++, but I learned tax law. And folks, it's incredible how many times people get into something without thinking of what their exit strategy is going to be, okay? And it's got to be a tax-smart exit strategy, okay? Folks, in a publicly traded corporation, you need an arm's length transaction to record value. You've got to sell something. You can't go in there. We don't allow appraised value on the balance sheet, okay? That's because whoever's going to be an appraiser, it's too easy to play with them. Sorry. Billy, do we massage our appraisals? Yeah, I mean, we put our best foot forward. We make it easy for the appraiser to find the value we think is appropriate, okay? And now they've tightened up the standards, which is wonderful, but an appraisal is nothing more than a professional guess, okay? And there's, as if you've taken an appraisal course, you'll know, I mean, there's cost approach, there's income approach, and then there's the market approach. And hopefully they all come relatively close together. But anyway, a publicly traded corporation has to sell to recognize value, and many funds, some of you want to be in private equity, have 3-year, 5-year, 7-year holds, okay? I'm on the board of directors of a small venture fund, vulture fund, probably a better word for it, $50 million, not much. I mean, we went in and out in, a year or two. We're buying things, fixing up and flipping them, kind of fun. Billy gets to read all sorts of things about retail and hotel and stuff. Billy's my analyst for it. But they have to sell either because to recognize value or because the fund's coming to an end. Neither of those apply to me, okay? Anybody know what depreciation is? What's depreciation? Okay, I mean, you buy a car, it's not going to last forever. Whether its life is 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years, it's going to depreciate. Buildings depreciate as well, okay? And there's their real life depreciation, which we could talk about, but there's the tax depreciation. And under United States tax code, residential real estate is depreciated over 27.5 years, straight line, and commercial is depreciated over 31 years, straight line. In theory, it's worth less. You get to deduct your repairs. If you do capital expenditures, you're supposed to capitalize them and deduct them over the life of the capital expenditure. Depending upon what you are, me, because I don't want to pay taxes, I try to push everything in expenses, make all the judgment calls toward expenses. If you're publicly held, you tend to make all the CapEx expenses because it makes your profit look greater because you're your expenses are less, so you try to push them toward CapEx, capital expenditures. Anyway, the point being is that you buy a property and you hold it for, let's say, 10 years. Well, you have to depreciate it because the tax code said depreciation taken or allowed. So you have to take it, okay? You don't take it, it's still going to be. Anyway, so you're taxed on your depreciated value, but they're going to take, capital gains is up in the high 20s now. And I hold my real estate forever. James, why do I hold my real estate forever? One would hope. But the number one reason why I don't sell is because I would owe Uncle Sam a hunk of burning love. And let's say I'm making $100,000 a year off that property, and I sell, and I have to pay 25% of the sales price to Uncle Sam. I've got to go out and make $125,000 off the next investment. I have to, I can make 25% more to make up for my reduced capital, okay? But, James, if I refinance that property, and let's say it's worth $10 million, and I can refinance it for $7.5 million, or I can sell it for $10 million. Now, if I sell it for $10 million and I pay Uncle Sam $2.5 million, I got 7.5, right? If I refinance it at 75%, how much do I have? Yeah. And the income stream. And I don't have to recognize value to a third party. Now, one reason why I prefer, my partners do. One reason why I don't, to me, it's my partners are like a gerbil wheel. I have to keep replacing them every 5 to 7 years. Otherwise, I have to shrink my management company, et cetera, and I'm forced to sell whether I like it or not. Now, there are advantages to it. Why does Andy like partners? Yeah. Diversification. Takes a lot of intellectual capital. You can diversify your financial capital, but boy, oh boy, does it take a lot of intellectual capital to find and recycle partners. So, but all the way back to your question of why I choose 10-year money, because I'm in a permanent hold cycle. And 30-year money, you can get it. The spread is larger, and the 30-year rate's higher than the 10-year. It's just too uncertain, too far out, too uncertain horizon. And if you ever want your lack of flexibility, the D-fees, the prepayment will kill you. All right. Seth doesn't have to be the only one asking me questions, I'll take them from any of you. Yeah. I've done them once, okay? Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code, formerly known as the Starker Rule. Basically, you can exchange real estate for real estate, and there's no tax consequences. You have to identify up to three properties, and you've got 45 days to, I don't remember the exact say, 45 days to identify, 90 days to execute, or 180 days. But the truth of the matter is that while the time frames may seem generous, they put you under tremendous time pressure. And there is a tremendous tendency to overpay, okay? Because first off, you don't know exactly when you put your property on the market, you don't know when it's going to sell. And then you got this short time frame to go out there, and you got this money burning a hole in your pocket. And so I've done it once, and I think I executed it fairly well. We got Lakeview Oaks and Bivens Cove, okay? Lakeview Oaks being better than Bivens Cove. Lakeview Oaks down in Tampa. There's something called TIC, T-I-C. Anybody know what tenant in common? Do we have any lawyers here? No lawyers. We usually have at least one lawyer. Anybody know what a tenant in common is? It's a form of real estate ownership. And basically, you could call it, it's an informal partnership, though legally it doesn't have to be. But anyway, tenant in common. And typically, tenant in commons are 2 or 3 people, maybe 4. I mean, if you're married, it's called a tenancy by the entirety. It's just a way of owning real estate. If me and Kesler went and just bought a piece of real estate and put both our names on it and we weren't married, we'd be tenants in common under common law. Under Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code, you can only exchange like for like. You cannot, and it has to be real property. You cannot exchange a share of stock for a share of stock. You cannot exchange a partnership interest for a partnership interest. Don't ask me why. That's just how Congress did it, and it's been set in stone forever. You have to exchange real estate for real estate. Now, if you own as tenants in common, it is still considered the exchange of real estate for real estate. Okay? So the question came, how many people can be in a tenant in common? Okay? And it cannot be a partnership. Well, very stupidly, in my humble opinion, about 10 years ago, the IRS said, 30. That is an unmanageable number, particularly without any structure, because it cannot have structure, because the minute you give it structure, it's a partnership, and it can't qualify. So something known as promoters went out there and started to take advantage of this, okay? Syndicators. And it is the biggest, okay, I'm going to use the word fraud I've ever seen. I was out in Vail about 5 years ago at a conference for C-level officers, and this guy was presenting, well, actually more than that because it was a previous session. He was presenting how they did this. And, okay, here's how it goes. First off, you got to get 30 people together, which means they're relatively small people. If they're big, they do it themselves. So you get mom and pops, people selling $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $1 million little business. Maybe they own this business, they're selling the real estate. Anyway, and you've got to collect these people together. Well, under our system, financial advisors are not required to tell you about their conflicts of interest. So some advisor can go up to your mom or dad when they sell their business and their real estate and say, oh, you can avoid taxes by doing this 1031 exchange, and I'm not going to tell you I'm getting a commission of 6 or 7%. Okay? Which means you're starting 6 or 7% behind. So all the financial advisors who collect all this money together and give it to the syndicator, okay, get 6 to 7% without the need to disclose, and you could write your congressman about that. All right, the syndicator, well, he gets another 5 to 10%, right? So you find we've overpaid a bit already, and most of these mom and pops have no idea what a hotel or an office building should sell for. Okay, they may know what a single family should sell for, but they have no idea what an office building, so you can oversell them. Now, you've got to go out there and you've got to find somebody with a piece of real estate who's willing to hold still while you put your syndicate together and buy it. And there's only one reason why people will hold still. Listen, I'm out there trying to buy apartment communities. The pressure, they want 3 weeks due diligence and 3 weeks close. You know, boom, boom, boom. They want money hard from the day one. Okay? The pressure to close fast is incredible. There's only one reason why somebody would hold still for 3 to 6 months. And that's because you're overpaying by probably 5 to 10 to 20%. Okay? That's the only reason somebody would hold still. So think about these poor people. They're being ripped off by the financial advisor. The syndicator's coming in there. There's also a fair amount of attorney and CPA fees. And the syndicator gets an ongoing management fee because they can't have any organizational structure because that would make them a partnership. Okay? And then they're overpaying for the real estate. And a lot of these things, we manage a community called Campus Club. It was a tick. Okay? It went into receivership. Okay? And we got called up. And we don't usually do third-party management. We think our management adds equity value. We don't do third party. But anyway, they came to us and said, hey, you want to manage us? And we did it for 2 reasons. One was, hey, it was free money falling in our lap. We didn't have to go out there and solicit it. And 2, they were being commodities in the market. They're going out there $299 a bedroom. Okay, well, let's raise the rent up. But anyway, and it's back 3 years later, it's on the market and will probably be sold soon. But it was a tick. And when these things go in, there's no management structure to solve problems. There's no way to make, it's very difficult to make capital calls. And the syndicator usually isn't that good a manager, okay? He's just in it for the fees and, you know, and when it starts to become hard work, he says, tosses it to the bank. So anyway, 1031 is dangerous for the pros and a disaster for the individual, okay? So, and it's IRS's fault for allowing 30. All right. Any more questions before? Yes, yes, Seth.
So, kind of a couple questions. A lot of talk about student loan bubble. No, Marquis had an interesting video about student loan bubble.
Yeah.
How do you think that this whole idea of student loan bubble could affect student lending?
Yeah. Well, first off, it's most of the okay. I mean, God, I love private enterprise, but I think there are a couple areas where the profit mode doesn't work too well, and one of them is education, the other is medicine, okay? And most of the student loan bubble where they're not getting, I mean, there's two things wrong. A, you got a lot of debt, but what's really bad, you get a lot of debt and you didn't get any education worth a damn. And the for-profits, Phoenix University, and then they just shut the Corinthian one down, that's where most of your problem is. I mean, if you go off to the Ivy League and you come home with $80,000 of debt, but you got an Ivy League degree, at least you've got an Ivy League degree, okay? But it's the where they don't even, sometimes there's been fraud, people don't even realize what they're signing. Oh, this is your application form, don't worry, you don't, blah, 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 you know? And they get the money sent directly to the school, the person never realizes they're in debt. I mean, it is, and once again, it's a failure of regulation. But so the biggest problem is that. I will tell you, related to student loans, and by the way, you may or may not know this, but your tuition, what's your name? Kara, what percentage of the cost of your education do you think your tuition pays? You can give me both. I cannot tell you the individual degrees, but I can tell you the average at the University of Florida, your tuition covers 20 to 25% of the cost of running this university. 20 to 25% of the cost of this university is paid by tuition. Okay? That which you attain too cheaply, you esteem too lightly. But I will tell you, in the student housing thing, there's this incredible amenities race. I was up in FSU the other day, last month, and I walked into this clubhouse for a new community being built. I think it's the Forum. Is that the name of it? Across the street from West End? It knocked my socks off. I've stayed at five-star hotels that didn't have amenities this nice. It was incredible. My jaw was dropping. And I'm sorry, I went, like 1982, 30, we drove beat-up VW Bugs, and where this money, maybe, I don't know whether student loans, but my thought was, by golly, if they got this kind of money, they ought to be paying more tuition. Sorry, you're probably mad at me, but believe me, the other 75% is paid by, folks working for a living. But anyway, so I don't know what is driving the amenity race in student housing, but it is ridiculous, the level of amenities that it takes to beat the prior community out there. So.